What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here today to examine an issue of the X-Men. Today, I'm examining X-Men issue 56. This is two stories here. The main story is written by Roy Thomas with penciling by Neil Adams, inking by Tom Palmer, and lettering by Herb Cooper. The backup story is written by Roy Thomas with penciling by Werner Roth, inking by Sam Granger, and there is no letterer credited in this portion of the issue, so I don't know who did the lettering here on this. But some big stuff to note. Neil Adams is doing the penciling here, and he's going to be on the book for a little while. Neil Adams would eventually become very well known for his work with Denny O'Neil at DC Comics, their brief run on Green Lantern, Green Arrow in the mid-70s, and also their run on Batman around that same time. This was still very early in his career, and you can see some of the stuff in his work here that he would later be very well known for. A slightly more realistic style with the people that he draws, at least a little bit more than some of the stuff that we've seen so far. And also, his work is just very dynamic. That's something that I talked about when Jim Steranko was doing a couple of issues on this book, is that the art can really make or break any issue of a comic book. And I shouldn't have to say that. That seems like common sense. Comic books are a visual medium, so you want the art to really engage the reader. You don't want it to be boring art that the reader is going to be put off by, because then the entire issue is just going to be broken. But you look at some of the art in this series, and overall, I've really enjoyed most of the art over the course of the issues that I've talked about. I don't think there is any artist that I have outright disliked. There might be, when an artist changes on the book, I might initially be a little apprehensive. Okay, this is different than what I'm used to. It's going to take me a while to get used to it, but then eventually I would get used to it. But I don't think there has been an artist where I was just like, I really don't like what they're doing on this book. But a lot of times in 1960s comic books in general, the art can just feel very stilted. The panel placement can just be very boring, and that can make it difficult to read a comic book or to want to read a comic book. It can make it be just a slog, and oh man, I still have 18 more pages to read of this comic. How am I ever going to get through it? And then an hour later, okay, I finally finished the comic. And that is not the case with Neil Adams' work. It feels very exciting. There is a sense of motion here. There's always something going on. Even if the story slows down, Neil Adams is able to find a way to make the art really jump out at you. And in that way, it reminds me a lot of what Jim Steranko was doing. Now, ultimately, Steranko's art and Neil Adams' art, they're not really that similar. Steranko goes for more of a trippy, psychedelic kind of vibe, especially later on, like when he was doing Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And then Neil Adams doesn't really do that with his work, although there is one panel here where Jean Grey is using her telepathy to try and track down Angel, and that's a really cool looking panel. Looks like something you would see in a really psychedelic, groovy movie from the 1960s. But overall, Neil Adams, it's not that his work is similar to Steranko, although I think he and Steranko both acknowledge that the art really needs to have a sense of fluidity and motion to it. You can't just have, let's just have everything look very stilted and still, and that just doesn't really work. Like I said, I'm not trying to throw any artists under the bus who have worked on this series over the previous 55 issues, but I really do think that Neil Adams understood that this needs to be done in a certain way to really make people want to keep reading. So I really like his work here. I won't say that I have always liked Neil Adams' work. I think some of the later stuff that he's done in his career I don't like as much. He wrote and drew a Batman storyline called Batman Odyssey that was just complete nonsense. The whole story was awful. I didn't care for the writing, and I really didn't care for the art in that story either. But looking at his work here, I really like his work, and I can see why he became very famous within the comic book industry. So the story itself, we find out what the connection is between the Living Pharaoh and Alex Summers, and why the Living Pharaoh was trying to kidnap Alex starting a couple of issues ago. Basically, we find out that Alex gets his power from the sun, and that makes sense because Cyclops, we found out in the backup feature in that issue that talked about how his powers work, that he gets his powers from the sun. If he and Alex are brothers, it makes sense that they would both get their powers from the sun. And the Living Pharaoh says that as soon as Alex's mutation kicked in, basically him absorbing his energy from the sun, that was blocking the Living Pharaoh from using his mutant abilities. We find out that he is a mutant here. Up until now, I don't think that we knew that. And he puts Alex inside this glass dome thing that's basically blocking him from absorbing sunlight. And then the Living Pharaoh turns into this giant gray-looking monster called the Living Monolith. And and then he attacks the X-Men, and then somehow Alex is able to bust out of the glass case. I guess he still had a little bit of power stored up in him, even though he wasn't absorbing any sunlight. And then somehow the living monolith is taken care of. I don't think that he dies, but he does collapse, so I don't know. But then Alex, he runs out of the ruins of where they were, and he screams that his mutant powers are out of control. And that's a little bit of a weak ending. We already knew that his powers were out of control because he used his powers on the living Pharaoh at the end of the previous issue, and then he didn't know what was going on. He didn't even know he was a mutant. So we're kind of treading water a little bit here, although we do get an explanation for why the living Pharaoh wanted Alex. And props to Roy Thomas for trying to make this work, because he did not start this storyline. This storyline started at the very end of Arnold Drake on the book, and I don't know how much of that was Arnold Drake saying, yeah, let's do something, let's introduce a new character that can be Cyclops' brother, and then he gets replaced. I don't know if Arnold Drake wanted to be off the book, or if he was told, no, you are not going to be on X-Men anymore. I really don't know what was going on behind the scenes with Roy Thomas coming back on the book, but either way, I am pretty sure that this story did not start off in Roy Thomas's head. I think he came in and was forced to kind of finish this up, a story that he didn't have any control of when it first started, and him connecting the living monolith to Alex, that works okay. That's a good explanation for why this guy kidnapped Alex. I am curious why the living monolith specifically is targeting Alex, because Cyclops has been around for years, and we know that he absorbs sunlight, so why didn't this guy also try to kidnap Cyclops? In theory, if this other guy was absorbing sunlight, then the living monolith wouldn't be able to use his powers there either. Also, why have the X-Men never heard of the living monolith? Because Alex was only recently using his mutant abilities. I don't think that his mutant powers kicked in much earlier, before he graduated college, so I don't know why the X-Men have never heard of this 40-foot gray-looking dude with a Pharaoh costume running around anywhere. I think that would have made the news at some point. I'm pretty sure Professor Xavier's Cerebro machine would have picked up on that. So that's a little weird that this is the first time that we are seeing this guy use his mutant abilities, when he seems to know once he puts havoc in that glass case that he is going to turn into the living monolith. Also, we find out that this guy was an archaeologist. So I guess this is kind of like Batman villains like King Tut or Maxie Zeus, who are dudes in the present day, but they think that they are a pharaoh from 1,000 years ago, or a Greek god, but really they're just mentally unhinged. I guess this is something kind of like that, except that we don't know what made this guy decide to start dressing up like a pharaoh and start referring to the gods. At one point he calls himself a mix between Osiris and Set, I think, or something like that. And we don't really know why he's so obsessed with Egyptian culture, or ancient Egyptian culture, rather. We don't know what's going on with any of that. I'm guessing that when Arnold Drake first started this, that he was just wanting something visually interesting. He could have been just a normal dude in a suit who knew that he was a mutant, and he was trying to stop Alex from absorbing sunlight so that he could use his mutant abilities. That would have been fine. The story would have made sense, except that visually it probably would have been very boring if it's just some dude in a suit. So I can kind of see why they did that, but also it is a little silly. Why does he dress up like a pharaoh from, 2,000 years ago or whenever? So anyway, that's about it with this issue, or this portion of this issue. Then we jump into the conclusion of the origin of the Angel, and this one was weird. Again, I don't want to throw all the blame towards Roy Thomas, because I don't think that he was the one who started the origin of the Angel. I'd have to go back and look, but I think Arnold Drake was the one who started this storyline in the backup features as well. But this ended in a really odd place. So when we last saw what was going on here in the backup features, Iceman and Cyclops were in Warren's loft that he rents, waiting for him, and then here Professor X says, guys, you've got to attack the Angel, and then he doesn't know what's going on, so he attacks them. He doesn't know who these people are, and they're saying, we want you to join us, and he says, no, I fly solo, and then he is able to knock out Iceman, and then Professor X, from somewhere, we don't know where he is, he's able to contact Angel, and he says, hey, you picked up something from that crime scene that you stopped a few days ago. It is an untested nuclear isotope, and somehow it has been activated by your mutant physiognomy, and so we need to try and turn that off. And so Angel says, okay, I'll do it, and Professor X says, I need you to fly up into the outer edge of Earth's atmosphere where it will get cold, and that will turn off this nuclear isotope. And then Angel does that, you start to see ice forming on him, and then he breaks breaks off the top of the thing, and that's what deactivates it. Then he comes back down to Earth, and then he meets Professor X, and Professor X says, do you want to join the X-Men? He says yes, and then he says, okay, but you're not going to be allowed to use any of this gimmicks that you use as the avenging angel, like the gas gun and any of that stuff. And boy, there's just so much that I could say about this. Number one, why does Professor X send Cyclops and Iceman to go and recruit the angel into the X-Men? Now, I've talked about this a little bit before in these backup features, how he sends Cyclops to go and recruit Iceman, and then Cyclops wasn't very good at it. Iceman didn't have any interest in joining Professor X at first. He wanted to stay in jail. Once again, he sends two X-Men to go and recruit the angel, and why? Why not you just go and meet him yourself? The X-Men is your idea. This is your dream that these guys are fighting for. Why don't you go and make the sales pitch? I understand if a bald, creepy man came up to me and said, do you want to come to my school? No, I'm not an accredited professor. You're just going to have to trust me on that. That would be really weird and creepy. So if he said, there's these two other guys, they're closer to your age and they're already there, then I would be a little bit more willing to listen to him. So if Professor X brought Bobby and Scott with him, that would make sense. But he sends these two by themselves to break into Warren's apartment, and then as soon as Warren comes into the apartment, he says, attack. And I guess he knows that everyone in the city is in danger of this nuclear isotope that, for some reason, Warren stole from the crime scene where he was fighting those burglars. But I don't know why Professor X couldn't have just been there himself. Also, he tells Scott and Bobby to attack Warren, but then later, after Bobby has fainted, Professor X is able to contact Warren and say, hey, you've got a nuclear isotope. Why couldn't you have just done that before? I understand that we have to have a fight scene. We've got to have punching in a superhero comic. We can't just have characters doing things that make sense. We have to have some action, even if it means that these characters are going to do stuff that makes absolutely no sense at all. But you already had a whole lot of action in the front part of this issue with the living monolith, so couldn't you have just had Professor X be there, and then he tries to convince Angel to join him, and Angel at first says, no, I don't think so, and then he kind of comes around on it. Couldn't you have just had something like that? I don't think you had to have a big action scene in this issue. But anyway, after Iceman gets knocked out and Scott is about to get knocked out, then Professor X is able to contact Warren, and he says, hey, you got that nuclear thing, and then because Iceman is knocked out, he can't freeze it, so Warren has to fly it up into outer space. Also, Professor X says, you're not going to be using the gas gun anymore, which we know that because we've read the previous 55 issues, and in the present day, Warren does not use any gimmicks and gadgets to fight crime, but why would Professor X be against this? This guy's power is flying. That's all that he has. It would make sense for him to have some kind of offensive weapon, like a gas gun or something, so that if the Toad is about to push this button to launch a nuclear weapon or something, he can just do a quick little shoot the gas gun and knock him out before he does that. Yes, he can fly, but that's not necessarily going to be very handy when you're going up against the Sentinels or something like that. So I don't know why Professor X is shutting that down, other than he never used any weapons like that in the previous issue, so we have to explain why he doesn't use weapons like that now. But then you get into the 90s, and then you have Bishop, who always uses a gun every time they go out in the field. So I guess at some point Professor X was able to loosen up his standards a little bit for the X-Men. But that is the end of the Origins of the Angel, and I'm sure we're going to have at least one more issue that explains how his powers work. That's what we've been doing with all the other X-Men so far. But now, I'm guessing that we're not going to have any more origin stuff after that. I'm guessing that we are coming close to the end of the backup features, which I've been of mixed minds on these backup features ever since they started, because when we first started with the Origins of Cyclops that lasted like 5 issues, I was kind of excited because reading an entire 21-page story that was pretty rough to get through, I hated that, and I was ready to kind of shake things up. If you have a slightly shorter story in the main part of the issue, then you're going to get to the meat of the story a little quicker. You're not going to have 5 pages of fluff that doesn't need to be there, but then you would stretch out the Origins of Cyclops or Iceman so that it's 4 or 5 parts long, and then you're still getting a lot of fluff in these stories. It's just broken up over several issues. So as soon as we started doing these backup stories, I was kind of like, oh man, I can't wait till these are over, even though I was excited to have the monotony of these issues be broken up when they first got started. But now, I feel like the issues are a little more exciting than they were when we were in the closing parts of the Factor Chapter 3 storyline. So I'm a little excited to see what is going to happen now that we will have the full length of the issue to explore a story. Are we still going to have a little bit of padding and fluff in there to make everything reach 21 pages like we used to? Or are we going to say, no, let's do a 4 or 5 part storyline, and then if we only have a 1 part storyline, that's fine. We don't have to have fluff to make something be a certain length. So I'm curious to see what happens next. I am pretty sure we are going to get an issue talking about how Angel's powers work. I remember reading something about that. So we're probably going to get at least one more backup issue, maybe more. I don't think we're going to get one for Jean, because X-Men issue 1, we saw her join the X-Men, so we don't really have any way of making that exciting. She joins the X-Men. We already saw that. So I don't think we're going to get a backup origin for Jean. So we are probably coming close to the end of these backup features. But that's about it for this issue. We're probably going to get a little bit more with Alex angsting about his powers are a danger to everyone around him. You can tell he's related to Cyclops, because that's going to be his defining trait at this point for a little while. Anyway, that's about it for this issue. So consider this one examined.